The Cannabis Heals Me podcast, episode 88.
You're listening to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast, where we explore the real stories of real people who have discovered the profound healing properties of the cannabis plant in their own lives. Find more at cannabishealsme.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. This is your host, Rachel Kennerly, and I'm coming to you once again on a bright and cheery Monday morning. Well, I don't know if it's bright and cheery because I'm recording this well before Monday, and it could be rainy and dreary where you are. But hopefully the sound of my voice is bringing a little joy to your world. And speaking of joy to the world, Christmas is right around the corner. If you haven't gotten your shopping done, you probably need to get on that because, it'll be here before you know it. Today is the, 16th? So we have 9 days till Christmas. That's crazy. I've got to get some shopping done because I have a 10-year-old boy who is going to be very disappointed if he doesn't have more under the tree this year than what I bought so far. Now, in case you're wondering what I want from you for Christmas, I have a very short Christmas list and it won't cost you a penny. I want you to go out and give us a rating or a review on the podcast app you're using to listen to this show. And the reason I ask you to do this, that helps us with the algorithm of your podcast catcher. And it will actually recommend this show to other people who are listening to similar type shows that have never listened to this show before. So it's an easy, free way for you to help this show get the word out to more people about cannabis as medicine. Make my Christmas wish come true. Go out to your podcast catcher and give us a rating or a review, preferably both. If you'll give us both a rating and a review, that would be awesome, and we would be sincerely appreciative. Also, if you know anyone who lives in South Dakota, call them and tell them, I have this awesome podcast that I want you to listen to, because this podcast has been downloaded in every single state across this nation, with the exception of South Dakota. So I'm begging you, if you know anyone who lives in South Dakota, call them and ask them to please download the podcast in their podcast catcher, or go out to the website, cannabishealsme.com, and click on a button and listen to an episode for 60 seconds. That way I can get one download in the state of South Dakota, and then I can check off every single state in the United States as having listened to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. Those are my only 2 Christmas wishes of you, my guest, and if you could do me that great honor, I would sincerely appreciate it. My guest today is Kim, and I'm not giving her last name because she lives in the state of Texas. And as most of you know, cannabis is not legal in the state of Texas. So I am withholding her last name so that she can come on and share her story freely. So without further delay, let's hear from Kim. Hey, Kim, welcome to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. We're glad you're joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. I am glad that you're here to share your story. A friend of mine had a mutual friend of ours, I guess, had kind of connected us. And so I'm glad that you're willing to come on and share your story. Now we're not going to share your last name. We don't want to cause any trouble with local CPS.
Correct. And I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm in a state where my medicine is not fully legal, but I'm from a state where it is. I'm actually from California. I've been in Texas for 15 years.
Okay.
And we do have a mutual friend. I actually met her when I first came to Texas, and I was at that time teaching in a private school, a religious school. My faith is very dear to me. And so I was an educator. I taught high school English and a little bit of elementary. And around that time got married, was blending a family. And my history prior to that had been, as a young woman, I was kind of reckless. I partied a lot, used different substances. But interestingly enough, I never enjoyed cannabis or weed, whatever everyone called it. And I was in Northern California, so I had access to some pretty decent cannabis at that time in the 90s. It wasn't the drug that caused me a problem. Methamphetamines was, and I had a couple of years that I spent as a young single mom using daily, and really kind of had to break free from that lifestyle. And I would say became a believer, a Christian, and became super conservative, a teetotaler, very, very wanting to make sure that I was not going to color outside the lines anymore. I was terrified of losing control of my life because I had. And so in a lot of ways, like mental health wise, I didn't really realize it at the time, but the pendulum had swung to the other direction.
Yeah.
And so I moved to Texas and met my husband. And like I said, we blended a family. And I had always at this time, like I said, had some depression, anxiety, obviously some instability, but I had a lot of trouble with my periods. And I was the girl in school that was always going home for cramps. And it made me I felt embarrassed about it because I didn't know a lot of my friends that were feeling as extreme as I was. And I would sometimes have to leave because I was in so much pain. I was nauseous. My own mom really was kind of skeptical that I was feeling that awful. And I had some very extreme emotions around my period as well. But I didn't really ever, until I got married in my early 30s, start to wonder if my instability mentally had anything to do with my cycles. And it really took me a while after we got married and after I got pregnant with our now 13-year-old. And my body was just out of control. My mental health was failing. My cycles were, 60 to 90 days at a time.
Oh,
and
my
when they
goodness.
would come, oh yeah, and they were really painful and really, it was every time I had a period, my husband and I were almost divorcing. It was really that.
And if you prefer not to answer this, that's okay. With your cycles being the way they were, was fertility an issue?
Well, see, the thing, when my husband and I first got married, I had 2 children and he had a daughter, and we were like, oh, we're good. We're not going to have any more kids. And I think by now, like we've total with adoption and everything, we have 8 total. So that's laughable.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that y'all had that many.
Yes. So we first got married and we really weren't. And when I tell you that we were like towing the faith line, my husband did not kiss me until we were at the altar, because we had lived so recklessly. And we tell people when we laugh, they're like, wow, how pure. And he's like, no, I had to be honest with myself that I had sex with every woman I had kissed. And I did not want to have sex until I had sex with my wife. And so, we were coming at it from a very honest with ourselves point of view. But I was concerned that I didn't think I could get pregnant because my cycles were so wonky. But we were kind of trying to work it out with my gynecologist and just make sure, because we weren't really wanting to get pregnant. And she put me on Prometrium to kickstart my cycle and kind of get me into a regular cycle. And what it really did was make me ovulate. And we got married in April, and I found out I was pregnant in July.
Oh, wow.
And so, not to mention whatever, Prometrium is a hormone. So, I was already hormonally not okay with the need for it. And then I had a pregnancy that was very difficult. I was just sick the whole time. I just felt miserable the whole time. And actually, it was a very, difficult delivery, all of these things. But after my son was born, I just went into some postpartum depression. And I don't know that I identified it as that at the time. I just hated my life. And I thought I did all the things I thought I was supposed to do to have a better life.
Right.
And I am miserable. I hate it. And so I kind of began at that point, this was probably around 2009, so probably about 10 years ago. And I started to really just go on a journey I wanted my mind back, and I wanted control of my days. We were wasting entire weekends in conflict because I didn't have control over my emotions.
Yeah.
And so it began again in therapy, psychiatry. At one point in 2015, and I don't know, I had shared a picture recently on social media of me in 2015 because somebody was asking, like what was my highest weight. I had recently been losing weight, which I'll get to. I had weighed 266 pounds, and I was on 5 different psychotropic medications.
Oh, wow.
And they were Prozac, Geodon, Vyvanse, Intuniv, and Trazodone. And if you look back at like the sequence of when those medications were given to me, it was like one was just the cover up for the next, and then the cover up for the next, and the cover up for the next. In the meantime, I was still miserable, and it was still just like a panic. Our prescription medication coverage at the time required that we use their mail order service. And if there was just ever an issue with it, it was like a panic because one of the medications I was without because of the mail for 3 days, Geodon, and I could not sleep. I had become so dependent on it. And it was like the opposite. I mean, it was like a revisiting how I felt in my meth years where I didn't have control of being able to make my body go to sleep. And I was just done. I felt like I had, again, tried to do everything right. Slowly started to just determine that I needed to scale back on those medications and explore some more and did some research. And we connected a lot of my issues, mental health wise and physically, with PMDD, which stands for Premenstrual Dysphoric Disorder. And I mean, it's specifically kind of like a premenstrual syndrome that is categorized with some very extreme mental illness symptomology. And I mean, I can tell you that as a woman in my mid-30s with children, it was horrifying to me to find myself locked in the bathroom, cutting myself the way I was counseling teenage girls in my classes not to do.
Oh, wow. Hey guys, wanted to tell you real quick about our podcast host and sponsor, Anchor.fm. If you're thinking about starting your own podcast, I highly recommend Anchor. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. They'll distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go out to Anchor.fm to get started. That's Anchor.fm. Now back to the show.
And so it had really gotten to that point. And then I would have my period, and it was like I could barely remember who that person was a week or so before.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah. And if you read about some of like family members who have experience with someone with PMDD, I mean, a lot of them, it's like, I don't even know who this person is. So just fast forward a few years, probably till about 2 years ago. And I had begun to feel like I was getting older. I'm 46 now. I was worried about my weight and knew that a lot of these medications were not going, I mean, they were contributing to my weight and making it impossible for me to lose any. Not just physically. I don't think people often understand that, of course, you can cut back your intake and you can do the exercise, but when all of these drugs are affecting your mind and your ability to be motivated and follow through and stay awake or go to sleep, it's really difficult to put those things into practice. And so then as an educated person, I would also feel a lot of shame for like, how did I let myself get to this point? And so in around 2017, a very good friend of mine, which, I get choked up when I think about it because of the great risk that she took to say, hey, I know of something that might help you. And I was just not someone, I've always tried to not be judgmental regardless of, my faith. I've tried to be open with people and hospitable, but I really was a very toe the line, live by the law, that, that's what happens. As much as I am a lover of social justice movement, I was not even at that time seeing the connection between the drug war and some of the issues that are very dear to my heart. And so it was a great risk for this person, as I'm saying, to say, if you don't want to try it, that's fine. And she was actually even really only encouraging me to try CBD. And let me think, maybe it was more like 2.5 or 3 years ago. So it really had not become as widely available as it is now, even just that short time ago in my state.
Well, even 3 years ago, CBD was like, ooh, it's, cannabis derived. Yes. So it's got to be the devil.
Right. And so whenever my friend came across any products that had a higher value of CBD in it, she was really trying to be tender with my conscience. And I just have to tell you that probably immediately I knew that the THC was also helpful to me in a way that I wasn't interested in. Like, I can look back on my 20s when my health was not my concern, when my focus was just so much more unhealthy. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't something I was after. I wasn't looking for relief from the calm or from the storm. I was the storm, And so I just knew immediately. I would tell my husband, I would talk through it with him. I mean, we prayed about it. I feel like I'm a better person. I feel like I can hear, through the just cacophony of chaos daily. We do have a house full of children, and I felt like too that I was less reactive in my hurt feelings towards him over things that just seem so inconsequential. When I tell people it feels like insulation in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a place for, the thought to bounce around before I let it back out unrestrained. And I will tell you at this point, so, I mean, really initially the benefit was immediately mental. I just felt like, I think I'm not so miserable anymore.
So when you started, was it just with CBD oil, or did you have like a high CBD strain of cannabis? Like, not hemp, but,
No. So really, I'm one of those people where I really only ever had access to black market products.
Mm-hmm. So you have no idea?
No, I really don't have a lot of idea. I think that there were times I'm really selective. We have to be so careful right now. And I do hope that the federal government would just quit dragging their feet, because there's just so much more good that can be done. And I am frustrated with my own state, because the very things that I think make its spirit unique are being squelched by this absurdity over not lifting prohibition of cannabis in every possible way, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. For all our bragging of being the Lone Star State and of being our own country, we toe the federal line when it comes to prohibition and so many other things.
Right. And it to me, I am in what I like to brag, of the, I'll just say that the metro area of one of the largest cities in our nation, in our great state, that is known for its medical progression. And what? Are we kidding ourselves? We're not going to even pretend this is a thing. So I have to believe that the good people here behind the scenes are talking logic and reason into, because again, like I said, I look back at myself a couple of years ago and the tremendous risk it was for someone who loved me greatly to say, I know this is not your thing, but I think you should hear me out. And so I have to hope and pray that I know that there are people like that in our government who are having these conversations. And I don't trust a lot of people in our government. I'll just say that. But I do trust that there are people with integrity in every area, in all walks of life, who are, opening doors as much as others are closing them.
Well, I think we've got some good people in Texas, not a whole lot from what I can tell, but like, Senator Menendez, and I can't remember who the other guy was that proposed the decrim, not decrim, but kind of decrim legislation.
Right.
And Dr. or Representative, I don't know if he's a congressman, I don't know. Menendez, he actually spoke at the Texas Marijuana Policy Conference and kind of told his story of how he got involved with medical cannabis. And it was because of his father who had cancer, and his son did some research and wanted to get
Right.
cannabis for
that.
his,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was very moving. So, I mean, he has a personal story as to why this, he changed his mind. And I think that, God forbid anything happened to, relatives or friends of Dan Patrick, but I think it's going to take that before anything changes with him.
Well, but I think that's one of the reasons that your podcast is so important, because people sharing their personal stories, and it's really emboldened me, even in my faith community. I do try to be selective because, I think that I want to be cautious for people who may not really be in a healthy place to make that choice.
Right.
And I know that's not always my job to parent people, but, like in a women's small group, a lot of times people are going there because they're vulnerable and looking for something. And I don't want to suggest that cannabis is what they're looking for. That's all I'm trying to say.
Right. And probably from your background of substance abuse, were you nervous about using cannabis because of that background?
I was, and I still am. And I have to tell you that my husband is really he's a very saintly, but also level-headed guy. I mean, and he's been through a lot in dealing with a lot of this with me, but he, immediately experienced the benefits as a husband and as, the other parent in the home, observing, and just, I mean, I can describe like a liftedness and just feeling like I could be more present and outside of my emotions or the stress of whatever is going on, and compartmentalize better. Because a lot of times, with trauma and stress and, the things that go wrong in our brains, it's that we can't compartmentalize that this emotion is for this thing and it will pass. I mean, it's the anxiety and fear that I can't get through it. And I think that's what it has done for me. But you're right. I hope that there's no tragedy that would become anyone, but it's that people are saying I am different, and their family members are experiencing this person is different. They're healing, like I was wanted to say. So that was a couple of years ago, and I've only had access to black market products. So I really don't know. I know that there have been times things have come from real dispensaries because they've been brought to me by people who, I think one of the things as I was kind of preparing myself for our conversation tonight that I kept thinking about is, like, we may take vitamin C, but every single time the doctor would say, I'd really rather you eat an orange. And that's because there's a lot more than vitamin C in the orange. And I think that's something that really I started to kind of process through is the whole plant. There's things in this that are beneficial, the whole thing, trying to extract and determine. And I would love for us to have a legal market, to be able to fine tune what we have available to us in our state better. And even, with more medical professionals involved, I don't know how much I want the government involved in my prescribing.
Yep, I'm with you on that.
Because of my experience, I feel like if I look back at those 5 drugs that I was taking at all that time, I mean, there was a period of time that even the morning after I took the Geodon, I could barely stay awake to drive, but that was perfectly legal.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's not even a controlled substance.
Really?
But it's not a Schedule 1. That's what I'm saying. It's not like I don't need a duplicate or anything to get it from the pharmacy, and people, I think that's what people assume. Well, if it's, cannabis is a Schedule 1, it must be really, really bad. Well, no, I mean, because serotonin changes your brain. Like all of these, I mean, there isn't a way around that just because, like, I don't think the way we schedule these drugs is even appropriate at all, because we're not, I mean, the money, how do people know? So I'm off track. Let me get back on. So I've over a couple of years, and I finally just over time was able to get down. I'm down to 1 antidepressant right now. And actually in February, I was so excited. I felt like I was feeling so great. And I had finally gotten up the nerve. I'm going to go to the doctor and she's going to look at me and see how fantastic I'm doing. And I'm going to tell her I'm using cannabis, right? And my husband's like, I don't know, like, wait and see how it goes. And so we get there, and I didn't end up telling her, but I got a phone call a couple of days later, actually, that I had diabetes. And this was this February. And so I was so frustrated because I felt like, well, I've done all this. I've gotten off these drugs. But the reality is I knew I was still overweight. I hadn't done any of the other, I hadn't done the work back on my body to repair the damage that had been done, even though I was feeling a lot better because I had reduced the drugs I was taking and medicating with cannabis. But I was really terrified. And I have to say that this has been totally different experience with, fear for me in my life. That for the first time I felt like I could sit down and think, how am I going to address this then? Because I cannot die. I have, we've reached, within the last couple of years, adopted 3 small children. We have a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old that we adopted. And I lost both my grandmother and my aunt to type 2 diabetes related illnesses, and really just felt deeply I have to do something. So at the time, a lot of the consumption of cannabis that I was doing was in edibles that I knew they were being made by the person. And, I'll just say it was a gummy, but there's an awful lot of sugar in those.
Yes.
And I wasn't paying, as much as I was paying attention to how much better my mind was feeling, I just wasn't paying attention to my body. And I knew that really the only true way to combat type 2 diabetes is my diet and activity. And my husband and I, went on a low carbohydrate, most often high fat, keto, whatever people want to call it. I'm probably more loose than that diet starting in February. And I actually just checked my BMI yesterday, my body mass index, and I cannot tell you when I last checked it, and it did not call me obese.
Oh, wow.
And I have never been so happy to be overweight in my life.
You're no longer morbidly obese. You're just overweight.
Right.
That's awesome.
And I'm just sharing that piece because I don't think I could have made the changes in my lifestyle as a 46-year-old woman who just already decided I was, getting older without the cannabis. I think the health to my mind and to my body was preparing me to be able to make this change.
That's incredible, Kim.
It is. I've lost almost 65 pounds now. My husband has, of course, my husband's done like this. And I'll also say too, my husband has a TWIC card, so he doesn't medicate. He doesn't, sometimes he'll use a little CBD that we have made sure is tested, something, but he's really, his employment precludes him. So I feel really fortunate to have a spouse that isn't, we're not, somebody that you think of, oh, she's an old hippie from Northern California. Because I kind of am, but I wasn't. And I feel really fortunate to have his support in it, but I also know it's because he lives with me and he sees.
Mm-hmm.
And not
he sees he knows better than anybody else in this whole wide world how much better you are than you were.
Right. Well, and
because you probably don't even realize how much better you are, but he sure does.
Oh, right. No, he does totally, without a doubt. And I feel like I hate the situation we're in legally because, like I said, I have become more emboldened, but sometimes I just want to look at somebody and say, I wish I could just tell you.
Yeah.
But we're just not quite there yet. Not in my personal situation. I'm so grateful for you have had so many people on your podcast that have helped me learn that I've, I know one's coming to mind, Amanda. Is it Munson Hughes or Hughes
Mm-hmm.
Munson?
Yeah, Amanda Hughes Munson.
I think I learn something from her every day.
Yeah, she's great. She really knows her stuff. I love her.
But I just,
But, the other thing, the flip side of that is she doesn't have kids at home. So, what she's risking is herself, not risking her
right,
kids. And
right.
if you've got kids with a background in CPS, the last thing you want to do is have them wind up back in that same situation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We're just and that's, I mean, what really, my number one priority obviously is to be the best mom that I can be, to my kids and wife to my husband. And I can't do that if I'm not here or if they're not here. But I do hope that our state gets on board. And I don't know, I hate to say gets on board because I feel like we are an intelligent people here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about not getting on board. It's about the right people getting on board.
Well, I don't think anything is going to change until Dan Patrick is no longer lieutenant governor.
I agree with you.
Because he's just flat out said, no, I'm not going to allow any cannabis related bills on the floor. And he's the one that specifically excluded PTSD as a qualifying condition for the pathetic 0.5% THC teacup program.
Well, and that's ridiculous too. I was reading about that the other day, and that I read a lot about PTSD because that's another diagnosis that I've had. I would probably argue that a lot of people have PTSD and don't know it. We live in a culture that's traumatized. I mean, people, our generation, watch 3,000 people die on TV in real time. I don't know how many of us couldn't. But when I don't know how the science can be denied, and why would you tell, our veterans, not just me, but our veterans, the sacrifice you make is fine for me, but the relief from that, no.
Yeah. I think that's the most egregious part of it is that our veterans are denied access to plant-based medicine when they get back from fighting for our freedoms.
Right.
That's what they're told anyway. You're fighting for our freedoms, but you come back home and you don't get the freedom to choose what medicine you put in your body because we don't trust you with that to make that choice.
Right.
As far as your medicines go, when you started using cannabis, how many medications were you on at that point?
When I first started taking the cannabis, I was still on 3 or 4. I was still on 4 of them. I had stopped taking the Geodon and that's an antipsychotic. And of course it was like, this particular drug only causes weight gain in like 9% of the people. And that was me. And I hate to say that too, because I was culpable. I know that, but when a drug changes your body, it changes your body. And if it's not helping, it's not. But I took that for almost 5 years. And I gained 80 pounds in 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And then I stopped taking the Geodon in actually really kind of an unhealthy moment.
Mm-hmm.
But then went back and talked to my doctor after the fact that my husband and I had gone to an Astros game, and I was feeling uncomfortable in where I was sitting. And I just kind of felt like, noticed another woman in the crowd and was just really frustrated with myself. And I guess at the time I thought, well, that will be the magic bullet. If I don't take it, then I'm just going to lose all this weight magically. But that's not how it works. And instead, it just kind of, it sent things a little bit more topsy-turvy than they needed to be for a while. But I think what people don't realize for these drugs that we get prescribed, whether it's through a psychiatrist or through your general practitioner, for your mind, they cause very real withdrawal effects, just like any other drug that you take for your body, or even heroin, or opioids. And that once I got through just feeling horrible, getting off the Geodon, I would not allow myself to do it again. I wasn't going to go through it. And I said, we're going to have to find another way, because that can't be it. So I did continue for a while on the other things. And, I had felt like I had a Vyvanse prescribed for ADHD. that I felt like was really sort of triggered by the Geodon because it just made me feel so stupid. And I think a lot of times that's what happened. It's like, oh, well, I'm taking this drug now and this has come up. And we're not asking, is the drug the problem? Or is there, a better way instead of, like, okay, maybe none of this is working and what can? I don't know how many doctors I've read or documentaries I've seen or podcasts I've listened to where I've heard doctors say that I can tell people this one plant will do for you what these 4 things are doing, I believe. Let's try it. I mean, that should be the spirit of medicine. And that's what I have loved about your podcast. From the moment too, I have to tell you, I saw your logo. I loved it too, because I just love the image of the Moses holding up the staff in the desert and saying, look at this, pay attention to what's real and get better.
Yeah. I wanted to incorporate that in, because I think cannabis is medicine. And, people have been lied to about the plant for 80 years. And I think it's important for them to realize, hey, there are definitely medicinal benefits for this plant. As far as being fully informed, most people, if they go to a doctor or psychiatrist or therapist or whatever, and they say, hey, I want you to get on these antidepressants, they're not necessarily told, hey, we want you to be on these antidepressants. And by the way, you're probably going to be on the rest of your life. And because it's really hard to get off of them. I didn't realize, just because I've not been on antidepressants before, I didn't realize that it was one of those things where you got on them, you couldn't get off of them. I thought, oh, you can take them for a few months and then get off. And it's not that way. And I think a lot of people feel trapped by having to continue to take these antidepressants.
And that's actually the only one left that I take right now. I've begun, I had a pretty unsettling weekend a couple of weekends ago, just more emotional than I have been in a while. And my husband and I were talking about it because here I am taking this particular dosage, but that hasn't been adjusted since I've lost 65 pounds.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And what we do know about some of these drugs is that too much can be just as harmful as too little if you need it. And so that's something I'm having to go back and look at, but that's one of the ones that I'm still taking. And I'll tell you too, a very good friend of mine is a therapist, and she's putting herself through, she's a single woman though, without kids. And she's putting herself through the drama of coming off of her SSRI. And she told me recently, my experience gives me pause now before I refer to somebody for medication.
Well, that's good. I mean, I hate that she's having to go through that, but it is good.
It is good, but it really, it is so unsettling to think of how many other mental health professionals are not given any pause whatsoever. And they're just like, you know what will make this easier? Go. And that's the thing that I feel really frustrated is people don't seem to recognize that when your brain isn't functioning properly, it is a part of your body, just like your heart and your liver and your lungs. And if it's not functioning properly, neither are the parts of the body that it's in charge of.
Yeah. Well, I had a family member who her therapist said, oh, she's having a really hard time right now. I think we should put her on antidepressants. And I was talking to the guardian as person. And I said, look, don't do it. I said, it's not something where you get on, you're on it for a few months and then you get off. It's like, once you get on those antidepressants, you have to stay on them for a lifetime. And there are other ways to address, depression other than just let's throw a pill at it, maybe try these things, because you probably know from your own personal experience, changing your diet, incorporating exercise into if you improve your physical health, and sometimes that affects your mental health positively.
Right. Well, and that's one of the therapists that I've had recently, because I will say that I think it's super important to remain responsible for, your mind and your body, the health of those things with medical professionals that, you're willing to be open with. Look for a doctor that you're going to be open with if you're not comfortable being open with one that you have, because I at least want, if anything to goes wrong, them to know why. Because, I mean, this is the only body we have. And I mean, but the therapist that I had, I mean, she said more and more the research goes back to that, you know, again, just like your brain is a part of your body, and we nurture our body with food. The food that we eat is going to our brain. And one of the things that was eye-opening to me, because a lot of this goes back to the FDA. I mean, the scheduling of cannabis, like who's in charge, the gatekeepers, and what in my diagnosis for type 2 diabetes, and having, you know, had adopted children, when you have any experience with kids that are in the system and they're entitled to, you know, like WIC benefits or something, and you get this WIC plate, and the plate has the portions cut out by size based on the FDA recommendations. And I will tell you that when I look at that plate as a type 2 diabetic, it is a lie, because it tells me to fill that plate in a way that will give my children diabetes.
Yes. Yeah, we could totally go down that rabbit hole with as far as food guidelines. My friend Jimmy Clegg, he's done a ton of research. He switched to keto, and I think now he's kind of more on a primal diet. And he just takes a deep dive into all this research, and basically all the guidelines for the food and for food are, it's the whole food pyramid is upside down. You know, the way they recommend you ought to eat is it needs to be turned upside down.
Right. And I just, at this point, I'm so mad about it. I think that's, I feel angry. I feel lied to. I feel like I have, well, not just about the cannabis, but about the way I have fed my body, heart and soul, in every organ, because I believed what I was being taught in my public schools by my, you know, government funded and curriculum teachers.
Right. Well, I think that's the problem with central planning, and the more we centralize government into the hands of fewer and fewer people, the more those hands can be influenced by hands with big pockets of money.
Right. And that is my concern. I obviously want to see the prohibition change, but I hate what's happening with the whole vaping thing, because I feel like it's really putting a highlight on a few bad eggs in the grand scheme of things. Because, I mean, American cannabis users who are medicating with this plant owe it to the black market old timers who were willing to say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And I think that we should be doing everything we can in the way we vote to protect the industry for the people who were here in, you know, the grassroots of it.
Yeah, because in some of the states that have legalized that, if you've had a prior drug conviction, you can't work in the industry. And it's like, what?
Well, and why would we do that? We're going to cut out the experts.
Exactly.
I mean, I mean, these are the people who were doing the chemistry on this plant before, you know, when we were still saying it didn't have any medicinal value. Let's file for this plant patent over here on the side, though.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But I mean, I pray and long for the day that it gets on board. And my ambitions are probably a lot more not government controlled. But I mean, any movement, I hate to see people continue to go to jail.
The pragmatic approach is, you know, every little bit we can get. You know, some people want to see full legalization with no regulation, which in an ideal world would be amazing. But we just have to baby step it at this point.
Right, we do. And we have to, I do think that we have an opportunity to, I mean, and I'll just, you know, on my personal soapbox, the 3 boys we just adopted are, they're African-American boys. And I think that a lot of times we get caught up in the community and look at these dads that are all going to jail. And if we're culpable in that, we need to send those men home.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing with the Christian conservatives, and I'm pointing a finger at myself because I used to be there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is we talk about how the family is broken down and that the men aren't in the home, and a lot of that goes right back to the drug war. But we're taking Black men and we're putting them in prison, and in some
Right.
cases for years. And in doing so, we're taking them out of the home. We're forcing the mothers to be single mothers. But the Christians are the ones that are saying, yeah, throw people in cages over plants.
Right. And then penalizing the single mothers and their children for not having, as a culture, the way we look down. And I mean, this goes back to my senior thesis in college was on, the inequality of welfare reform and how it, is not, and this is even before I thought about how the war on drugs affected that. And so really just as my, the things that I've learned and looking and seeing, like, why have we done this out of a sense that we feel like we have to cause other people to be moral? That isn't something we can even do. It's not even the basis of my faith.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing, is that there's no basis in Jesus never said throw somebody in a cage because they don't believe like you, or throw somebody in a cage because they use a substance that you don't agree with. And Christians are the first ones to line up with pitchforks to have them put in cages over stuff that they don't agree with them doing.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we're so afraid. Well, Rachel, I appreciate the opportunity. I hope I gave you anything that was of any use for anyone.
No, I think you're great. I think it's nice for people to see that this plant can help you get off a lot of those medications, and then just the help, the changes that you've made in your life as a result of it.
Yeah, I don't think I would have been, I really don't, I wasn't ever going to be someone who is active. It's hard to describe to people what your difference in thinking can be when you just have, like I said, some insulation, some buffer to cut down on what's getting in the way of ability and motivation and your own self-encouragement.
A lot of the people that I've talked to have said that cannabis has actually made them more mindful of their health. Heather Dagley, who actually used cannabis to get off of antidepressants, she said that that's one of the things that she's noticed, is that when she uses cannabis, she's much more conscious of other health choices that she makes, which is the total opposite of everything we ever heard about cannabis.
Right. It is. I mean, it is the opposite of, when I look at the things that doctors have said I should put in my body, and when I look back, somebody was asking me about the pictures that I had recently posted, that 2015 picture. And then I just took a selfie the other day, which I don't do a lot of, but I hated this picture from the get-go. When I look back at it now, I see someone who was bloated and sick and deformed from poison.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I agree that using the cannabis became a way for my brain to start healing and crave what my body needed, and be able to say no to things that it doesn't. Because I think it's fascinating when we see people who are giving up opiates and all of these other drugs, be it street drugs or pharmaceutical, and they have the willpower to do it in a different way because they're using cannabis, and what, that's bad?
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be,
Yeah, I agree completely. Kim, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Great. Well, thank you, Rachel.
Have a good one.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Show notes for today's episode can be found out at cannabishealsme.com/88. Thank you guys for joining me today. We will not have an educational episode on Thursday, and Monday's healing story may actually be a little late, possibly as late as Tuesday or Wednesday. Apologies for that, but hopefully after this one little bump in the road week, we'll get back on track, and I'm hoping that during the holidays, I won't have to miss any episodes. You guys have a great week. We will talk to you next week. Thanks a lot for listening. Hit the subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode of the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever podcast app you're using. Do you have a suggestion for a guest on Cannabis Heals Me? Send an email to podcast@cannabishealsme.com. We'd love to hear from you. Please do not take any information from Cannabis Heals Me or its guests as medical advice. Contact your licensed physician before taking cannabis or using it for medical treatments.